One more episode for the night. Let's play 999 space hyphen space 9. They left the operating room. The hallway took them around several corners and past several doors, but they were all locked. Until at last, the final door was hidden in the corner of the hall. Junpei grabbed the handle. As he made to push it open, a voice stopped him. The voice came from behind him and belonged to neither Seven nor Clover. Jumpy! He spun around. He saw someone running towards him from the other end of the hallway. There were 3 people coming towards Junpei and his companions. Santa, Lotus, and June. They pulled up short in front of Junpei, breathing hard. Whoa! What the hell is this? What are you doing here? What? But we didn't... Before he could finish, Clover spoke. Hey guys, could you come take a look at this? She was standing near the end of a small hallway that branched off to the right. The rest of them ran over to her, curious as to what she'd found. There was something on the wall at the end of the hallway. A map of the ship's interior. It said C deck in the upper left corner. It was, they assumed, a map to the floor they were on. Door 7 and door 8. The map confirmed what they already knew. Both doors eventually led to the hallway where they'd found themselves. In fact...
Yeah, isn't that what I said? We aren't going to split up permanently till we find door 9. We might get separated for a little while, but we see each other again. Otherwise, we won't be able to open door 9. That's how the nonary game works.
Junpei looked at the map of the ship's interior again. As he looked more closely, his surprise and excitement gave way to weariness. One by one, the others saw what he had seen. They moved as one for the door. He pulled the map of the ship's interior off the wall, put it in his pocket, and followed the others. The 6 of them stood in front of the door, arrayed in a semicircle. Santa stepped forward. He took hold of the door and spoke without looking back at the other 5. Ready? I'm gonna open it. Slowly, all 5 nodded their silent assent. With a deep breath, Santa threw open the door. They poured through the doorway and into the room. Even without looking around, each one of them knew where they were. They were just where the map had said they would be. The same room that had been in not so very long ago. The tremendous central hospital room with empty beds from wall to wall. I see. I believe I understand what you're saying. The 6 of you split up into 2 teams and went through doors 7 and 8. You solved the puzzles in the operating room and the laboratory, then met one another in the hallway after opening your respective locked doors. He looked like anyone might after only just waking up, but it seemed that his brain was working as well as ever. He had managed to grasp, summarize, and understand each team's report. At any rate, I feel a bit silly for my little show of altruism. I'm sure you'll be back for me. I did hope you would come back, but I confess I didn't think you'd be back so soon. Ace shook his head with a rueful smile.
Well, we saw each other again, and we ain't dead, so I say that's good enough.
7 smiled.
Anyway, I say we get out of this creepy old place. We found the key we need.
The key?
Ain't that what I just said? I'm talking about the Jupiter key. We found it in the operating room.
Sorry, that was my desk.
Right, Junpei?
Junpei nodded. I have the solar system keys. Actually, we found one in the laboratory, too. Here, the Earth key. Lotus dug out a still warm key with an Earth symbol on it. I might lose it. It's probably better if you hold on to it. That way it won't be my fault if it gets lost. And with that, she pressed it into Junpei's hands. He felt slightly less than honored. As a group, they now had 3 keys that had not been used. The Jupiter key, which had been found in the operating room. The Saturn key card, which had been found in the kitchen. The Earth key, which Lotus had just handed to Junpei. Junpei tucked the new keys into his pocket. June spoke up. The Jupiter key is supposed to be for the door at the end of the long straight hallway, right?
Yeah. If the map's right, then it connects to the central staircase. Then next to the stairs...
Wait! They were the first words anyone had heard out of the Clover in quite some time. Her face suggested that they weren't going to be very happy words. What about door 3?
Look, you saw the map, right? It's the same as 7 and 8. It just lead us back to the big hospital room. There's no point in seeing what's on the other side of that door.
There is a point. At least there is for me. There were tears in her eyes, but she glared at 7 as hard as she could, just the same. She looked very much like a frightened puppy. There wasn't a man alive who could have resisted those eyes. 7 looked everywhere in the room except at Clover and muttered and coughed some apologies, but under his breath, Boss stuttered.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Snake might be on the other side of door 3.
Clover nodded once. The next person to speak was Ace. Very well. I'll be coming with you then. I've had a nice long rest. I think it's time I was up and about again. So, 7, you'll help me, won't you?
Huh? Me?
Junpei did the calculations quickly in his head. 4 plus 1 plus 7 equals 12. 1 plus 2 equals 3. It looked like 7 was doing them too. At last he gave up.
Damn. Well, I guess that's how it's gotta be. So I'm going with you, huh?
Yes, you are.
Alright, let's get moving.
And so it was decided that Clover, Ace, and 7 would discover what lay beyond door 3.
Okay, we're heading out.
Be careful.
Whoa, didn't think I'd be hearing that from you, Lotus.
Don't let it go to your head. I'd be in trouble if the three of you bought it. The rest of us can't open the 9 door.
Ah, the truth comes out.
7 nodded as if this answer made much more sense, and pulled the lever on the red. Okay, let's go. The door opened and Ace, Clover, and 7 jumped through it. 6, 7, 8. After exactly 9 seconds, the door closed noisily. Alright, we should get moving too.
Huh?
Get moving?
Where are we going?
Everyone except Lotus seemed rather confused. Well, it would be a waste of time to just sit around, wouldn't it? Let me explain. ... On black screen. I get it. We're gonna see if we can get anywhere interesting with the Jupiter key. Yes, if we're lucky, we might find Snake. They were at the end of the hallway lined by individual hospital rooms. The Jupiter symbol was engraved on the keyhole. Alright, Junpei. Open it, if you please. Yeah, on it. Junpei pulled the Jupiter key out of his pocket and slid it into the keyhole. He twisted. With a nice sharp click, he felt the door unlock. Alright, ready, guys? Junpei's companions nodded. He nodded back, then slowly and quietly opened the door. Inside was exactly what he expected to see from the map of the ship's interior. They were in a tremendous hall, almost like a ballroom, with a massive central staircase. Great. Back to the beginning. You sure this is a good idea? What do you mean? Well, we already searched every inch of this room, didn't we? I'm asking you if there's any reason we came back here. Of course there's a reason. There's also no idea, but anyway. Man, sometimes I can't tell if you're smart or just lucky. Huh? This. Junpei pulled 2 things out of his pockets. The Saturn key card and the Earth key. Santa cocked his head to one side like an inquisitive bird and looked at them. After several long moments during which it became apparent that Santa had no idea what the cards meant, June took pity on him. Don't you remember, Santa? On C-Deck, where we are now, there was a big elevator behind the stairs, remember? And next to the elevator, there was a card reader with the Saturn symbol on it. And on A-Deck, on the door to the left, there was the keyhole with the Earth symbol on it. I think. So the 2 keys that Jumpy has should have let us use the elevator and the door on A-Deck. Huh. Yes, that's right. Junpei smiled, pleased with herself. So did Santa. Alright, I got it. Let's get started then. What do you say we split up into 2 teams? Lois and I will search the Earth one, you 2 can search Saturn, alright? Sounds good. Junpei handed the Earth key to Santa. They decided that their initial search should be brief, only 10 minutes. They'd meet back near the staircase once they were done. Junpei and June headed for the elevators. Sure enough, there was a card reader bolted to the wall next to the left elevator. He lined up with the Saturn key card and swiped it through the reader. A light on the upper left corner blinked to life. Great. Looks like it's working now. Alright, now how do I call the elevator? There was a single button to the right of the elevator door. On the button was the upside-down triangle, the universal symbol for down. There didn't appear to be an up button. Junpei pushed it. He didn't have much of a choice. It opened. So, at 10 minutes, I think this is a good place to stop. Look, Jumpy! June's voice was excited, but Junpei could hear a tinge of anxiety. Sweet, it opened. Let's get going. He grinned at June and stepped towards the open door. As he was about to set foot in it, he felt a hand on his arm. Wait. What? I'm not really, I just... Oh gosh. Junpei was at something of a loss. What could she possibly be so frightened of? June was probably afraid of the choices of they could only go down, or the fun one, being locked up alone with a boy. After a little thought, Junpei decided that she had to be nervous about being locked up in such a small space alone with a boy. In a way, it was kind of cute. Very demure, you could say, he thought. Still, even though it wasn't exactly roomy in the elevator, they weren't going to be pressed up against one another. At least, they didn't have to be. Still, it was making her nervous. Junpei couldn't help but think how innocent she was. Come on, let's go. Again he stepped towards the elevator. And again he felt himself restrained. I said wait a minute. Why? Aren't you afraid, Jumpy? Afraid of what? Well, I've never... She's never been in an elevator with a man alone before? Even so, she still seemed awfully alarmed. I might get wet. What? Down there. I'd get soaking wet. Well, I mean, of course you would. That's the way it works. I mean, I've never heard of anyone getting soaking wet somewhere else. That's true. You don't mind? Mind what? Getting wet. Well, I don't know. I think I'd probably, like it? Gosh, Jumpy, you're so brave. Really? I mean, I kind of think any guy would do the same thing, What happens, happens, right? If you get the chance, you just gotta go for it. That's what a man's supposed to do, I guess. You're so cool, Jumpy. I really admire you. That doesn't really seem like the sort of thing you ought to admire someone for. I'm really scared. Yeah. I mean, like you said, you've never done it before. Yeah. So I don't think I'll be able to last very long, and then it'll be over. Over? Yeah. I'll go to heaven. Heaven? It feels kind of like you're floating in space and your mind gets all fuzzy like when you pass out. At least that's what I've heard from people who have experienced it. Yeah. I've heard that too. Although I don't think the same thing happens to guys. I just realized a lot of times when it says yes, I say yeah instead. What? Huh? But it would happen to men too, wouldn't it? It would happen to anyone. Once it gets in your body, the same thing happens to anyone. Well, I mean, usually it doesn't go inside the man. I mean, generally. Yes, it does. Well, eventually it will. It's not like you really have a choice. Your body will force you to swallow some of it eventually. What are you trying to do to me? Nothing. I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm just saying that that's what happens. It's a psychological reaction to what you're experiencing. Was that really how it happened? It occurred to Junpei that perhaps that was how it worked. Perhaps he'd been mistaken all these years. Had he misunderstood life so gravely? The thought terrified him. June seemed to be entirely oblivious to Junpei's mounting confusion and terror. I know most men probably have larger lungs, but even then I don't think you could hold your breath for 20 or even 10 minutes. Eventually you'd have to breathe, and then the water would get in your lungs. Once that happens, your body won't be able to get oxygen anymore, and you'll start to feel that floaty feeling as you pass out. Finally, Junpei understood. He understood what June was trying to say and why she was so scared, and I wish that didn't sound so forced. But I can't laugh not forced unless I'm actually laughing at something. Like the first time that I ever saw this. Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't last very long. See? She was afraid that the only elevator button pointed down. That meant, of course, that the elevator couldn't go any higher than the floor they were on. As he thought about it, Junpei realized he hadn't seen elevators on the A or B decks near the central staircase. All of which that meant that the elevator could only convey them to the lower decks, and the floor below the one they were on, D deck, should be completely submerged. That meant... Hey, wait a minute. This elevator came up from somewhere under us, right? Well, yes, I guess it did. It didn't open right away after you pressed the button. There was a motor noise like it was moving and then it opened. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, take a look inside. Junpei jerked his head towards the interior of the elevator. It's not wet at all, is it? The walls and even the floor are totally dry. Oh, you're right, they are. She looked around the elevator, slightly embarrassed. Well, let's test it. Oh, just so you know, if I chose the other option that I don't remember what it is anymore, it would basically just take it straight to that thing of, like, nothing embarrassing or funny happening. Yeah, watch this. Junpei put one foot in the elevator and bent around the corner of the door until he could see the floor buttons. There were only two, E and C. He pushed the E button and jumped out of the elevator. The door slid shut and they heard the grinding of the motor as the elevator car moved down. A few moments later, they heard the sound of the elevator door grinding open several floors below. Junpei nodded to June and pressed the elevator button again. A few moments later, the elevator returned. The door slid open, and just as Junpei had expected, there was no water to be found. See? Junpei couldn't resist puffing out his chest, just a little bit. June, however, was still a little confused. What does that mean? How can the E deck be safe if the D deck is full of water? Well, here's what I think. The elevator shaft and E deck must be watertight and separated from wherever the ship's been punctured. Here, let me show you. He pulled out his notebook and pen and sketched out a rough illustration. I see. So is that why the ship hasn't sunk? The shape of the inside keeps it all from filling with water? Yeah, I think that's what's going on. Junpei continued talking as he closed his notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. So I'm gonna go down and check it out. You stay here, alright? But... Come on, just do it, alright? He gave June's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then hopped onto the elevator. He pushed the E button and the door began to close. June looked worried, her eyes darting back and forth as if she was trying to make a decision, when suddenly... I'm coming with you! Huh? At the last possible moment, June dashed forward, turning sideways just in time to slip through the gap between the closing doors. Junpei jammed his finger against the open button, but it was too late. The door had shut, and he and Junpei were in the elevator, and it was heading down to E deck. Take me down to the deck of EE. He was so surprised by June that he didn't even have time to think about what awaited him on the E deck. The elevator stopped and the door slid open. They stepped off onto the floor outside the elevator. Nothing seemed especially unusual. No fish going about their fishy business or jellyfish floating lazily through the water. There was, however, a blowfish, or at least something that looked very much like one. June's cheeks were puffed out and her mouth a tiny, intense frown. Oh, knock it off. It's just like I thought. This part hasn't flooded. Come on, just look around. There's no water here. June looked around nervously and then... Bah! Exhaled. You're right. It's not flooded at all. See? But there's a whole lot of water. Yeah, right on top of us. What's going to happen if the ceiling breaks? Junpei thought about that for a moment. Well, we'd probably get really wet up there. Huh? At any rate, we should probably go back as soon as we can once we're done looking around down here. Lois and Santa might already be back. Okay, good idea. Junpei glanced at the room they'd found themselves in. The first thing he noticed was a set of thick iron bars. They ran the length of the room, separating the left elevator from the right one. Well, we can't go over there. Right. Then perhaps... In the corner of the room that housed the elevators, Junpei found an opening. He walked up to it and stuck his head around the corner. A long straight hallway stretched out in front of him. That door at the end of the hallway. There's something written on it. Yeah, let's go have a look. Junpei and June set off down the hallway at a brisk clip somewhere between a run and a jog. Before long, they found themselves in front of the door. On it was a number written in bright red paint. 6. I knew it. This is a numbered door. And indeed, there was a red bolted to the wall right next to the door. Of course, with only 2 people, there wasn't much they could do with it. Alright, let's head back. Yes. Junpei and June turned around and headed back to the sea deck. On their way back, Junpei noticed a map on the wall. As it turned out, it was a burnt map of the ship's interior for E-Deck. Huh. So you guys found door 1. They met back up with Santa and Lotus, who had explained what they'd found. Apparently there was another numbered door on A-Deck, just like the one on E-Deck beyond the door that the Earth Key opened. According to Santa and Lotus, there was a 1 on the door. All told, they have discovered 2 new doors, the 6th door and the 1 door. It is interesting that the E-Deck wasn't flooded. Lotus was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. Well, we don't really know if all of E-Deck is safe. We only checked the area around the elevator. Even so, it's still very interesting. You said the 6th door was there, right? Yeah. Yes. That means Zero planned this all out, even the sinking. That would have meant something pretty serious remodeling of the ship's interior. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Yeah. I wonder how long it took. I can't even imagine how much it must have cost. Would have been a ton, that's for sure. Well, that does go along with what Ace was saying. The most reasonable explanation would be that this was done by some organization with access to a whole lot of cash. Yes, it does make sense. That thought made them all go quiet for a moment. June bit her lip while Lotus sighed softly to herself, and Santa cracked a stiff neck and stared off into the distance at nothing. I don't think it's a very good idea to stay here. June looked up at Junpei with large pleading eyes. Yeah, you're right. Ace and his team might be back already. Well, Junpei and I should be able to go to open door 1. Huh? You guys leaving me behind? 8 plus 6 plus 5 equals 19. 1 plus 9 equals 10. 1 plus 0 equals 1. Just kidding. Alright, let's go. Lotus's words were all the impetus they needed. Back to the large hospital room they went. I learned what that impetus means force from Champions Online. Anyway. Or something like force. The moment they stepped inside, a tremendous voice echoed across the room.
Hey! Where the hell did you guys go?
It was 7. Ace was right behind him, and Clover was behind Ace, although she seemed to be hanging back. It looked as though there was something strange about them. 7 had the look of a man who'd seen a ghost. Ace was just as pale, and Clover looked as though she was only moments from passing out entirely. For a long moment they simply stood there, looking at one another. Junpei looked around nervously, waiting for someone else to speak. No one did. He looked at 7. What happened?
What the hell kind of a question is that?
7 was trying very hard to be angry, but something had shaken him hard. His shoulders were trembling and his voice was strained.
Snake is...
7 couldn't finish. He just looked away, his face twisted by... Junpei wasn't sure what. Instead, Ace spoke. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and spoke. Snake is dead. He died, just as the 9th man did. It was as if the air had suddenly been sucked out of the room. Junpei felt his heartbeat quicken, and he realized that he was having trouble breathing. He could feel cold sweat beating on his forehead and neck. June, Santa, and Lotus looked the way he felt. All three were frozen in place, their faces white. Oh my God. It's not true, is it? We should make sure. Yeah, right, we should. They nodded to one another and headed for the number 3 door.
Wait! Not that way!
They stopped short and turned to look at 7. He was pointing at the door with no number.
I stuck a screwdriver in there to keep the door from closing all the way. It's not locked, so you can go in that way.
Where is he?
The shower room on the left side of the hallway. I put a broom in there, too, to keep the door open.
We can get in without going through the numbered door, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Their new destination clear, Junpei and his companions headed for the door with no number. Once in the hallway, it was easy to spot the metal door on the left wall. It hadn't been opened when they'd been through it before, but now, just as Seven had said, there was a broom stuck between the door and the frame, keeping it open. They looked at it for a moment, then stepped inside. It smells horrible. Lotus wrinkled her nose and covered her mouth in disgust. Even Santa pinched his nose shut. Yeah, this is pretty awful. I feel like I'm gonna puke. It was just as bad as they said, perhaps worse. A hideous smell filled the air, so thick they could almost taste it. It was sour and smelled of fish, feces, and burnt meat. It worked its way through Junpei's nose and down his throat to pound against the entrance to his stomach. He put his hands over his mouth and struggled to keep what little was in his stomach where it belonged. They didn't have to wonder where the body was. There was blood everywhere, a few arms of the splatter reaching towards them as they walked in through the door. All one had to do was follow the many radio alarms to the source. The body itself was hidden behind a divider. June, you should stay here. But, please, just do me a favor, okay? Alright? He didn't give her a chance to say no. He put his hand on her shoulder as if to shove her into the ground like a tent pole, turned and walked towards the end of the divider. He felt like it took an eternity for him to get him there. Santa and Lotus followed, timid and nervous as a pair of children. I forgot that I was recording this for a moment because I thought I heard the sound of my cat. But anyway, eventually they reached the divider. They looked at one another and nodded slowly. Junpei put his hands on the divider and peered around the corner. For a moment he forgot to breathe. He felt his heart collapse in his chest like an empty cigarette carton, and time froze. He knew in that instant that it would take the image before him to the grave. What was left of the body sat in a sea of blood. Chunks of flesh torn from the body sat in the blood like tiny islands in a great red sea. A vast ragged hole had been torn in the torso, and what remained of his intestines spilled out of it like fresh spaghetti. Smaller chunks of meat had been splattered against the wall and become stuck there as they dried. Globules of yellowish fat had left trails like tiny slugs as gravity pulled them down the wall, even as they dried to it. Just like Ace said. Santa's voice was strained. Junpei suspected he was holding down some vomit of his own, just like the ninth man. The detonator in the bracelet set off some bomb in the gut. It looked as though the explosion had been quite powerful. His lungs were both bent in an odd and unnatural way, and his left arm has been split open, exposing the painfully white bone of his ulna. His bracelet lay next to him. It seemed to have hit the wall hard enough to have shattered the display, which lay on the ground in pieces. Half of his head had simply collapsed. The blood coating almost made it look like raw pizza dough covered in tomato sauce. His clothes, too, were covered in blood. The burgundy tie, the white shirt, the jacket with yellow piping, and the gray slacks. They were all familiar to Junpei. No mistakes about that. It's Snake. Lotus's voice was unnaturally deep and strained, and Junpei heard it catch in her throat. The squeal of tortured metal made Junpei's teeth curl. It sounded like the noise a ghost would make. No matter how many times he heard it, he never got used to it. Every time it put him on edge. It didn't help that there was a girl nearby who looked far more like a ghost than a living human should. It was Clover. She sat on the edge of her bed, her head drooping listlessly onto her chest. Her eyes were blank and stared across the room at nothing. Her breathing was slow and mechanical. Aside from the rise and fall of her chest, she didn't move. Junpei felt as if even a nudge might cause her to shatter into 1,000 pieces.
Snake was probably murdered. Chances are he was killed the same way the ninth man was.
Seven lowered his voice, likely an effort to keep Clover from hearing what he had to say. There were 4 other people in the room with Junpei and Seven: Ace, Santa, June, and Lotus. Seven looked at each of them in turn, and continued.
It's pretty straightforward. Not that hard to figure out how they did it. First, the killers got Snake to authenticate on the reds to open door 3. Then they shoved him into it, alone, and waited 9 seconds for the door to shut. Once that door shut, it was over for Snake, but he didn't give up. He probably knew it wouldn't do him any good, but he probably ran into the shower room looking for the dead. It was a small chance, but it wasn't like he had anything to lose. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The detonators are only deactivated if everyone who authenticated when they went in uses the dead. And then 81 seconds after we were shoved in, that happened.
I see. So that's what you meant by killers, huh? You need at least 3 people to open one of the numbered doors, including Snake. Wouldn't open for Snake in a single killer. Exactly. I have a theory, but as far as I've seen in this game, it's not anything you can actually test. Like, what if you it wouldn't be a good idea in the first place, but what if you just, like, for example, if Junpei just put his bracelet on the 5 door, and then pulled the red, would it open, or would it not? Because in that way, there would only have to be 2 people that would have had to do it, which would have been just Ace and Snake. But that's implicating and such. And yeah, it's just a thought. Like I said. Anyway,
exactly. That means we're looking at multiple perps here.
Junpei crossed his arms and grunted. Well, just in case, I want to make sure. Let's say you're right. When do you think Snake was killed?
When we all split up to look for the Reds, I think. Right after that was when we noticed he was gone.
Then that means none of us have alibis. We were all off searching the rooms we've been inside looking for those parts.
Yeah, that means anyone could be a killer.
Wait a minute. What are you talking about? June seems shocked. How can you say that one of us is a killer so casually?
Well, not just one of us. If I'm right, then at least 2 of us are murderers.
Why don't you calm down a bit, 7? What are you going to gain by being so suspicious? That's what Zero wants you now.
What Zero wants?
Exactly. This game was set up by Zero, wasn't it? Any game has a winner and a loser. Whoever makes it through door 9 is a winner, and those who don't are losers. Zero's trying to make us fight against one another for that victory. Then you're saying that Zero's trying to split us up by making us fight each other? Yes. That is why we can't let ourselves fall prey to suspicion. We have to trust on one another and form a strong bond of friendship. Otherwise, we'll end up ensnared by Zero's manipulations. Then, does that mean that the person who killed Snake? Yes, almost certainly Zero himself. If there's anyone we should doubt, it should be Zero. He masterminded this game and kidnapped all of us. Doesn't it seem reasonable that he would have killed Snake as well? Junpei hadn't really considered that. If Zero had killed Snake, then Zero was on the ship with them. Was Zero still on the ship with them? It was either Junpei wasn't sure, or of course. I'm going to go with Junpei wasn't sure. He wasn't sure. Hey, I'm just wondering about one thing. And what's that? How can you be so sure that Zero's on the ship? Ace's eyebrows shot up. Really, Junpei? I confess, I'm a little disappointed. You're usually rather sharp. Isn't it obvious? Obvious? How so? This ship. Huh? Zero said this ship several times when he addressed us.
I am Zero, the captain of this ship. The purpose of the game is simple. Leave this ship alive. As you have no doubt surmised, this ship has begun to sink.
If he weren't here, he wouldn't say this ship, would he? He'd be saying something like that ship, or the ship. Good night. Oh. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Ace's explanation made perfect sense. Junpei felt a little foolish that he hadn't seen himself. Still, he was left with a question, and it was of no small importance. If Zero's on the ship, where is he? Suddenly, everyone went very quiet. The silence was cold and clammy, and Junpei could feel it crawling across his back and around his throat. Again, he'd heard the ghosting moaning noise, and moments later, a person who looked more ghost than human appeared. It was Clover. She looked at the four as she spoke, and her voice was a cold monotone. I think Zero's one of us. Every human body in the room froze. The only sound was the muffled rustling of breath. Eyes darted from face to face. One of those faces was the face of their jailer. But who? Junpei said, "There's either, well, that's possible," or, "That's crazy." Well, that's possible. Huh? Like Clover said, Zero might be one of us. What are you saying, Jumpy? Didn't you hear what Ace said? Exactly. They said we shouldn't suspect one another for no reason. No reason? I've got a great reason. And what's that? The bracelets. He held out his left arm. Why are the bombs in our bodies connected to the bracelets? You're all thinking Zero's hiding somewhere watching us, right? If he's doing that, then he could just detonate the bombs by remote control if someone did something they weren't supposed to. It would be a lot more precise and a lot easier. But if that's the case, then why is the bomb set off by the detonator in the bracelet? Huh. You got a point. I'm not done. Try applying the same ideas to the nonary game. All the puzzles in here are all run by themselves. In other words, Zero doesn't have to be controlling them for the game to move forward. Why is that? Why would Zero bother to do something like that? Junpei let the question hang in the air, looked at the others. It was Santa who answered. So let's say you and Clover are right. Zero is one of us. If that's the case, then it'd be really hard for him to keep track of all of us, or control anything remotely. That's why all the puzzles run by themselves. That's what you're getting at, right? Yeah. Junpei nodded. Seven, when we were talking earlier, you said any one of us could be Snake's killer, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Alright, then I've got a question for you, Ace. You said something like Zero must be the one who killed Snake, right? Yes, something like that. I can't think of any other explanation. So what do you get if we combine those? They fit together pretty well, I think. Something like this. Whoever killed Snake is equal to Zero, which is equal to one of us. Seven and Ace's theories aren't mutually exclusive, they actually complement each other pretty well. At least they do if Zero is one of us. No one spoke. Their faces were grim, but Junpei wasn't sure if they believed him or not. Finally, Lotus spoke up. What were his motives? His motives? Yes. Isn't that pretty important? Why would Zero want to hide as one of us? Oh, well that's because, Junpei choked. He hadn't thought of that, and he had to be honest with himself. He had no idea. I don't know. Lotus sighed. Well, so much for making a persuasive argument, Junpei. In other words, you only had circumstantial evidence.
I don't really think that's enough to go on, you know?
Junpei was painfully aware of their eyes on him and their disapproval. He tried to find something else, anything else to look at, just when he felt he could bear it no longer. They heard a bell begin to ring. It was the clock at the central staircase. 3 in the morning. That means we have 3 hours left. And we need to move. Now. 7, Clover, Junpei. I know how you feel, but you do understand that right now it's important we trust one another, don't you? Junpei couldn't bring himself to respond. He swallowed the words he wanted to say and sighed. 7 and Clover remained similarly silent. Their eyes were looking at something somewhere else, very far away. We must go. We have very little time left. Ace's words put their feet to moving. They all knew where they were going. Their next destination was Mercury. It sat bolted to the wall near the stairs that led to the casino and the kitchen between the 2 elevators. The Mercury card reader. Junpei stood in front of it with the Mercury key card. Seven had given him the card.
I found it when we were checking into the shower room.
At least that's what he'd said. Junpei slid the card through the reader. The light on the reader turned green and made a tiny electronic noise. Now they were ready. Junpei and Jun had been chosen as the investigators, the reasoning being that they had been to E-Deck before and no one else had. As before, Junpei had sent the elevators ahead to make sure the floors they were heading to wasn't flooded. As before, the elevator returned as dry as when it had left. Once it had been checked for water, Junpei and Jun stepped into the elevator. There were only 2 floor buttons they could push, the C and bottom buttons. The rest were destroyed or did nothing when pushed. Junpei hit the bottom button. The door closed. Slowly, they began to move downward. Sometime later, Junpei and Jun stepped off the elevator and onto the bottom deck. They stepped off and saw the hallway to the right ended somewhere between 20 and 25 feet from them. The hallway in front of them was a dead end, but not a regular dead end. This is a numbered door. This is the 8th one we found. There were 2 numbered doors on B deck near the central staircase. There are doors 4 and 5. There were 3 more doors, numbered doors in the large hospital room. Doors 3, 7, and 8. That makes 5 doors. Junpei and Jun had found another door on E deck, and Lotus and Santa had found a 7th on A deck. There was a 6th door on E deck and 1 on A deck. 4, 5, 3, 7, 8, 6, 1, and now door 2 stood in front of Junpei. There was only one thing it meant. Do you think the next door we find? Yeah, I think so. The next one's going to be door 9. Despite himself, Junpei felt excited. Also, a small note mentioning the theory that I mentioned earlier. 5 plus 6 equals 11. 1 plus 1 equals 2. If they could try that. Also, what if you didn't have to scan 3 to... or only between 3 and 5 for the dead as well? If that worked, of course. Despite himself, Junpei felt excited. There was something about that excitement that frightened him as well. He did his best to put it from his mind and headed back to C deck with June. Alright, let's open these up. The pieces of paper they'd folded up laid on the ground next to Junpei's legs. There were 7 of them, all told. They were written on paper pulled from Junpei's notebook, and each of them bore a code name and a door. Why had they decided to vote that way? They decided it wasn't fair simply to ask everyone at once. That would allow people to force others to go through certain doors. Well, that wasn't the only reason. Junpei had proposed the voting system, and he had a plan. It wasn't a plan he wanted anyone catching wind of, however, so he did his best to act calm as he began to open and read the pieces of paper. The first one read, Ace requests door 1. Yes, I do. Would you like me to explain why? No, we don't have the time for that, sorry. Not to mention obvious because he's number 1, door number 1. No shit. Let's keep going. He opened the second one. Next is Santa. He wants door 6. Yeah, that's what I wrote. Junpei continued with the third, fourth, and fifth pieces of paper. I suspect Santa wanted 6 because 6 is multiple of 3. That's me, though. Clover wants 1, Lotus wants 2, and 7 also wants 2. Wait a minute. There's no way I'm going anywhere with the Elephant Man. No, there'd be no point to the voting if we let people change their choices because of stuff like that. But... Just give it up, Lotus. It's not like I want to hang out with some exhibitionist grandma. I'm not an exhibitionist. I'm wearing clothes. Barely. So? Last I checked, that's not a crime. Maybe, but what about common decency? No one wants to have to look at a chick who looks like a half-naked raisin. Growling. I'm going to kill you! I don't know what inflection to put on that. God damn it. Lotus's hair fell out like the mane of an angry lion, and she roared with a voice that shook the walls. With some difficulty, Ace managed to restrain her. Junpei, read the rest. Yeah, right. Junpei tore his eyes away and looked at the 6th piece of paper. He opened it. June wants door 6. Yes. Excuse me. I don't really have a reason, I just felt like it. My butt. That's number 6. All of the papers, save Junpei's, had been read. He did some quick calculations in his head. People who requested door 1 were Ace and Clover. This was the door on the A deck near the central staircase. 1 plus 4 equals 5. People who requested door 2 were 7 and Lotus. This was the door on the bottom deck, and could be reached by taking the elevator to the bottom of the ship. 7 plus 8 equals 15. 1 plus 5 equals 6. People who requested door 6 were Santa and June. This was the door on E deck and could be reached by taking the elevator near the central staircase down. 3 plus 6 equals 9. It took him less than a second to run the numbers. He opened the 7th piece of paper and spoke. Okay then, the last one is mine. I want to go through door 6. I want to go through door 6. Junpei flipped open the piece of paper. It read Junpei, door 6. Of course it did. He'd written it, after all. That's a problem. Junpei spoke, barely above a whisper, but they all knew what she said. None of these teams will be able to go through the doors they want. Clover and I chose door 1. Lotus and I chose door 2. It's not enough people to open our door, however. The digital roots don't match up either. We've got similar problems. June, Junpei, and I want to go through door 6, but our digital root's 5. If we're going to open that door, we need a 1. Damn. What are we going to do now? What are we going to do? Junpei crossed his arms and did his best to put his thoughts in order. Let's actually use the calculator function. And if 1 came with us, there would only be 7, 8, and 4. 7, 8, 4, digital root, 1. So they can go through door 2. The others followed suit, but with a little result. Eventually Clover broke the silence. Why don't Seven and Lotus go through door 1? With me. Her face was cold and flat, as was her voice, but her logic was sound. Seven and Lotus looked at each other. 7 plus 8 plus 4 equals 19. 1 plus 9 equals 10. 1 plus 0 equals 1. The nice thing about 9, at least in these calculations, so it kind of sucks that the ninth man is gone, is the fact that 9 basically is 0. First problem resolved, Ace spoke up. What about me? Isn't that obvious? Wasn't one of the teams just complaining that they didn't have a 1? You mean I should join Santa's team? Clover nodded, her face still cold and emotionless. Her attitude and posture could not have been more different than the energetic girl only a few hours before. No one seemed ready to contradict her. Her response were understandable given the horrible situation in which she'd found herself in. But even so, I understand. I'll go through door 6 then. If we do as Clover had suggested, we all pass through a numbered door. No one will be left behind. It seems to be the most reasonable solution. 6 plus 5 plus 3 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1 equals 15. 1 plus 5 equals 6. 7. Lotus, what do you guys think?
I don't have a problem with it.
Me either. Alright, then we're good to go. At last, Junpei and the other 6 had managed to separate themselves into 2 teams. Clover, 7, and Lotus had headed to A deck, where door 1 was, near the main staircase. Junpei, June, and Ace and Santa, however, took the elevator to E deck. The ride to E deck was a silent one. Alright, let's go. Santa's words jolted them to action, and they stepped out of the elevator into a long, straight hallway. Before long, they arrived in front of the door 6. One by one, they put their palms over the red. With a soft electronic noise, it authenticated each of them. The door opened, and all at once the 4 of them leapt through it. Fortunately, the dead was located easily enough. This one had been placed quite close to the door they entered through. They gathered around it quickly and hurriedly placed their palms on it for authentication one by one. It stopped. Yes, it stopped. The countdown had ceased, but Junpei's heart was still pounding in his chest like a frantic, thunderous drum. It felt as though it might shake itself up and out of his throat. He'd been through the door 3 times before, but the repetition had not dulled the experience. He was not anxious to find it dulled, however. He'd hoped to be free of the ridiculous game long before that happened. Alright, let's go! With that attempt at good humor, Junpei took a deep breath and began to walk. He jogged down the stairs at the end of the hallway and found himself staring at a large door. It was a heavy thing, made of iron and more than a little threatening. He took hold of the bar that served as its doorknob and shoved it down. The room beyond stopped him in his tracks. It was gargantuan, made entirely of metal. None of the accents of wood or tile he'd seen in the rest of the ship. This room was purely functional, but utterly tremendous. Whoa, what the hell is this? Santa got out a few words before awe stole the rest of them. The rest of them were too stunned to offer anything more than gasps. It was easily the largest room they'd seen, and yet it was somehow closed and oppressive. The ceiling was at least 2 stories high, if not significantly more. It was easily several hundred feet across and appeared to stretch the entire width of the ship. In the center of the gargantuan room stood a massive rounded building. Even from a distance, the sheer bulk of it was oppressive. Junpei could feel the building, even the air pressing down on him. Junpei and the others were standing on the scaffolding that crisscrossed the whole area. The proper term was catwalk, Junpei thought, although that didn't seem particularly important. Alright, let's head downstairs. Nearby was a long iron staircase that made its way eventually to the floor beneath them. They moved around towards the opposite side of the massive building, following the catwalk. I should have just ended this at the door open, but oh well. They hadn't said much as they walked, but as they approached the building, Ace suddenly spoke up. This looks to be the steam engine room. The steam engine room? Yes, the thing that looks like a cross-section of the mushroom is a boiler. You see the 3 round doors near the bottom? Coal's put into those and burned, which heats the water, producing steam. The same thing that drives a steam engine. This one simply is somewhat larger. I see. Even if Ace was right, the boiler was boiling nothing as they approached it. The entire room was silent as grave. Suddenly, Junpei heard a noise behind him. He turned just in time to see June collapse to her knees. "Hey, what's wrong? Are you alright?" He dashed towards her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders to steady her. It was then that he noticed. You're really warm. Is your fever coming back?" Yes, it probably is. But I'm fine. Please don't worry about me. I just need a rest, and I'll be fine. Her voice was weak and forced, and it said a great deal more than her words did. Junpei carried her to the nearest wall and propped her up against it. She let her head fall back against the wall as if she no longer had the strength to support it, and drew a ragged breath. Her eyes were empty as if she was having trouble focusing them, and even speaking seemed difficult for her. Junpei felt his hand ball itself into a fist and clenched tight, his knuckles whitening. He had to find a way out, and quickly. He turned and looked at Ace and Santa in turn. They might not have shared the depth of his emotion, but they certainly shared his concern. He didn't need words to express the urgency of the situation. "Alright, let's get started. Hang in there, June. I'm gonna get you out of here real soon." She managed a small nod before leaning back to rest her head on the wall. Steam engine room. And this is a great place to save and quit for the night. That is 999 space 9. Or let us play 999 part 9. Whatever you want to call it. Until next time. Peace and such. Yo.